My name is Alex Crochet. I am the city horticulturist for the city of Colorado Springs. So to start, I'd like to give you a little background professionally. I started horticulture when I was 18 at the Seedling Tree Farm in Fort Collins. Many of you are probably aware of that nursery, and that was where I began to understand how to propagate native plant material. From the Seedling Tree Farm in Fort Collins, I moved to Durango, and I worked on ranches down in Durango, specifically ranches that focus on regenerative agriculture. I don't like to use the word permaculture because I think it's kind of a buzzy word, so I like to use the term regenerative instead. So I worked on many ranches and farms down in Durango and absolutely fell in love with that part of the state. And then when I moved back home after living in Durango, I became the horticulture curator for the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. And at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, I built all of the exhibits and maintained all of the exhibits as well as the horticulture that happened there. So what you're looking at in that picture is the brand new hippo exhibit that I built. And it was my job to build habitat that is supposed to look similar to what the animals look like. So then moving from the zoo to the city has a horticulture program, and the horticulture program has existed since General Palmer. General Palmer was actually an avid horticulturist himself, and I grow in his greenhouses. So his greenhouses were taken from Glen Erie and donated to the city in 1908, and those are the greenhouses that I grow in. So the next picture will show you what I do at the city, or part of what I do at the city. So city horticulture is just for growing annuals, or was just for growing annuals. So we grow 65,000 annuals a year, and that goes all along the historic medians in downtown, as well as the northeast part of town, and then parts of Old Colorado City. These are non-sustainable greenhouses, and this is a giant operation. This is one of 6 total greenhouses that I have, so they are absolutely loaded with plants. But what happens is we spend all winter growing and propagating this annual plant material, and then in the summertime, all that plant material gets planted into the medians and around the city, and these giant greenhouses go empty. So I started at the city in November, so I haven't even been there for quite a year yet, and we have started to pioneer for municipalities a native plant program. So I take cuttings, I take seeds, and I get those from all over Colorado Springs and El Paso County. We collect the seeds, and we also have community members who have been instrumental in getting us some of this native seed. And if none of you have been to Colorado Springs before, there's no place in the state and probably in the country that has open space on the scale that Colorado Springs has. It's everywhere. We have huge, vast trail networks. So there's a lot of area for us to collect seed, and that's riparian seed, that's high arid seed. There's a lot of places within El Paso County that we collect seed from. So that's my little crew collecting seed. We collect everything that we can collect, and it kind of depends on the year. So here you have the Yucca glauca, beet hazelnuts from a riparian zone, prickly pears, opuntia, lots of penstemons in El Paso County. And right now we're doing this by hand. We're going to work on that because it's a very cumbersome process. We also take cuttings, and we take cuttings year round. So sometimes we take dormant cuttings, sometimes we take leafed out cuttings. But this picture right here is an example. So in 3 weeks, I went from a cutting to a fully rooted 2-inch cell. And it's really easy to do just right in water. So some of this plant material we up pot into 1 gallons. That plant material is destined for areas that we will plant, likely in medians, and other places in the city where we kind of have room to move this plant material because it's heavy. But the native plant material has kind of 2 destinies. The first destiny could be revegetation. And if we're growing plant material for revegetation, we're going to keep that in a small pot because no forestry crew, no ranger crew will be able to take masses of 1 gallons, especially in the soil mixes that we're using, and move them into these areas because it's heavy, it's cumbersome, and digging a hole the size of a 1 gallon is just really not realistic when you're trying to get 100 trees somewhere. So if it's in a larger pot, that will be planted on medians and at parks, with the goal to start to really show people what we can do with really nice looking native plant material. So we hope to start to remove bluegrass. We hope to make the annual beds smaller and start to add some of this native plant material. And that's going to give us a resilient plant palette in the city as we get even drier. And that's also going to serve as an inspirational tool to the people in Colorado Springs so they can understand what we can actually do with the amazing native plants that we have. So all of these will go actually to our forestry crew, lots of willows, lots of cottonwoods, and those are in the larger pots. And then we do a lot in the much smaller sizes. We also do propagation by seed and by cutting. So I'll grow the same type of plant in both ways. Cuttings are much faster in a lot of things, especially the arid plants. Four-winged saltbrush, for example, that roots in 3 weeks. And I will have a fully rooted plant in a 4-inch pot in 3 weeks. And it's just that easy. I go to garden centers in Colorado Springs and see a 4-winged saltbrush for $75. And that's just so crazy to me because a tiny little cutting is now this big in my greenhouse in a 4-inch pot and ready to go out. We're also using soil blocks. So the soil blocks are really important to us because I'd like to start to see plastic be minimized in our growing operations. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that plastic will go away from the growing operation. There's just some things that don't grow like this in soil blocks. But the majority of what we're doing is in soil blocks, especially if it's more of our xeric plant material. And you see the soil mix that we're using. I'm actually using road base. So I see a lot of native plants propagated in peat moss or in some sort of potting soil. And that seems so silly to me because when I'm out in nature, I'm out in Garden of the Gods, I'm seeing these plants grow out of just straight sandstone rock. It doesn't make any sense. So we started using road base and a little bit of organic material, depending. I'll get to that a little bit later. And we're having incredible results with this. So I'm noticing, especially with the gaillardias and the penstemons and the columbines, things of that nature, they're really growing excellent in soil blocks. And these soil blocks in person are about this big. When you pull the soil block up, however, the root system is already far larger than that little soil block can hold. So it'll always be important for us to get that plant material out pretty quick because these tap roots go so deep. And the only way we'll establish a resilient plant in the first place is to make sure that their roots are not unencumbered largely. So we have to get this plant material out pretty quick. So we work with agencies in the Springs like Rocky Mountain Field Institute, but also rangers in Colorado Springs. And they're my little minions. They'll take this plant material and put it back into revegetated areas. And often when I'm collecting seed, I want that seed to go exactly back to the park or the open space that I took it from. Really good success with Grativida. It's all over El Paso County and all elevations. So there are kind of bread and butter plants that you'll see a lot of through these slides because I know if I can have success with it, it's absolutely worth my spending time. I would say the biggest downfall to all of this is it is very time consuming. And I've got a small seasonal staff of 4. And then year round, there's only one other horticulturist in the department. So that is kind of a drawback, but we're getting really good results. And we use volunteers as much as we can to produce some of this plant material as well. So this is what it looks like to soil block. There are square ones, there are round ones. We found this round one. But I'm using multiple ratios depending on the type of plant. So for the dry land, we're using heavy on the road base and light on the compost. And I'll get to the compost in a minute. For riparian, we go higher. And for grasses, actually, we'll go higher in organic material as well, because as they go dormant every season, they create a lot of their own organic material for themselves. So grasses do need to have a little bit higher organic material. So you can see the root wrap all the way around my hand. That's the root system in the soil block. And we started that plant in mid-July. So this is happening so quick. And I also am not pre-treating any of my seeds. There are some things here and there that I might pre-treat, but otherwise when we get it, we plant it. And we're having really good success with that. Another thing, so we will transplant into larger pots for some things. Some things still aren't in a 1 gallon, they're in a quart size. So a little bit larger. These Artemisia here are in a quart size pot. And these plants were plants that Maggie and myself actually lifted from an area that was getting a new trail cut. You're good. So when I hear that a new trail or a bike path or whatever it is going to be cut into the ground, my team will go out and will actually lift some of that plant material and then continue to grow it on until that trail is open, and then we'll take that plant material back to revegetate the area. We're having really good success with that as well. So the other thing that we're doing in order to eliminate the plastics in our growing operation is composting. So we are always going to do those annuals, and that annual plant program is historic. It's actually written into law by General Palmer that our medians have to look like that. So we will always grow it, but in the past, my predecessor just threw it in a dumpster when it was time for it to be done. I'm composting it instead, and we have built already 600 cubic feet of composted soil just from the scraps alone. There's no animal solids in this whatsoever either. This is literally just our leftovers and also weeds that we pull from the field. And we are careful with the weeds that we pull from the field that go in the compost pile. Things like bindweed and thistle we won't put in there. Things that can survive the 104-degree composting temperature, but largely most of our weeds go into the compost piles as well. So since I've started in November, 600 cubic feet of soil. In the past, we would spend about $6,250 on bagged peat moss soil. So we are cutting that out completely. It takes about 13 man hours a year to turn the compost pile, so nothing. And we'll spend about $600 on perlite because we will need perlite for the growing operation. And a little bit of topsoil as we test our compost and it comes back a little hot in nitrogen, we will put that topsoil in there to kind of lighten the nitrogen load a little bit. But we're saving taxpayers in Colorado Springs already in 9 months a ton of money. So 12% of our budget has been not needed because we're building our own soil instead. So the leadership at Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services in Colorado Springs is really excited about this because it takes pretty much no effort. And we won't have to fertilize near as much either because our compost is high in nitrogen. Also bacteria and fungi and just all the good things that you want in a proper soil. So this is what we were spending on soil, and this is what we will be spending on soil. So a huge jump in 9 months. Pretty awesome. So we're getting seed from citizen science. We're also collecting. Colorado Native Plant Society has donated a huge amount of seed to us. So far, we're at 7,500 plants propagated and fully growing since July of this year. So this is like 8 times more than my operating budget every year. So if I were to buy this plants in, I would never be able to afford it. But we are seriously making a ton of amazing plant material out of nothing. And then depending on what the plant is and what size it is, like I said, it'll either go in medians and parks or demonstration gardens, or we will use it for revegetation. This is a picture of the soil, the compost in my hand. So this pile was started in March, and this was about a month ago. So we have beautiful compost already. Heavy in wood chips because we had a huge windstorm that downed a lot of non-native trees. I don't know if you've ever been to Colorado Springs, but the downtown is supposed to look like Ohio, sort of. There's a lot of huge elms, there's a lot of huge oaks, and there's a lot of huge maples, and we had a freak windstorm and that downed a ton of it. So we were lucky enough to get just thick chips of wood from our forestry department, and those break down quick. And then these are pictures of what we pulled together, Maggie and I, when we lifted some of that plant material from the bike trail that was being built. So I actually left the rootstock of the opuntia in the ground because they will regenerate their pads, and we took cuttings, and now we have something like 250 opuntia, literally from just cuttings. Just sit it on the breeze and do nothing. And so all of this plant material will go back. And then all of the plants that we cut will also regenerate because their roots were left intact. So we're actually putting a lot more plant material back than we even lifted in the first place. We took some artemisia, there was some potentilla in there as well, and grasses. And moving forward, grasses are going to be a big focus for us because you'll see so many miscanthus Asian grasses in the ornamental horticulture world when our grasses are so much tougher so much more resilient, so much more xeric in nature. So we'll be producing a lot of grasses as well. So these are a lot of the people who have made this possible in the 9 months that we've been doing it so far. Of course, the Colorado Native Plant Society, tons of community members though. Maggie and myself held a conference with 70 people. In like a month, we put this conference on. People from 8 different counties came to see what we were doing, and they helped us seed another 2,000 plants. So we have armies of volunteers who are interested in learning how to do proper horticulture of native plants. Because the reality is, the major native plant programs are just not growing right. When you take peat moss and you put it back in the garden of the gods, and it is sand and sandstone, that plant is going to go through a serious shock, and it will likely not survive. But this red breeze is literally just like pressure fines, a little bit of clay and sand, and it's already starting its life off in something really tough. So we know that this plant material is going to be way more resilient when you get it in the ground. And then the leadership of Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Service has been instrumental in getting us off the ground, and many council members as well. And then we've received the Aiken Audubon Society grant, which has been a huge funder for us as well because we have a pretty small budget. So. And then these are the members of my little horticultural crew, and they are my worker bees. They have just been wonderful and a huge part of getting this program off the ground. So really excited. I was expecting to see good results, but I wasn't expecting to see as good of results. And I really hope this kind of excites people about doing this because it's really not a ton of effort. You don't need greenhouses to do this either. You can literally do this outside and just let these plants cycle with the seasons. So I really hope it's something that moving forward, other people can begin to adopt because it's stupidly easy, you guys. It's really so easy. You are first.
City of Collins has a program that you can get some money back from the city to do that. Not to get fresh and ready to start.
Remember, we're in Colorado Springs and not Fort Collins. There's not as much, but utilities does a lot actually. So our utilities company has an amazing xeriscape garden. There are classes that you can take through the utilities that then give you a voucher to the local plant nurseries, so you can buy plants. And I'm working currently with Nancy Henjum, one of our council people, to fix this a little bit more. They weren't really expecting in the 9 months that I've been here to even get to this point yet, but we hope in the future to do more things like that. Hmm?
Is that something you guys do?
Soil blocking is a pretty common tool. A lot of vegetable gardeners will use it. You need a really kind of wet, sloppy potting mix in order for them to work well. So the soil blocking with the red breeze and the Cimarron breeze is something that we developed, but otherwise soil blocking is a pretty common.
That's like really rich material, so good. Keeps the shape of that, and then you then just take that off.
Yep.
It's just like, what was the propagation?
So we started most things in July. However, the 4-week salt brush was 3 weeks from a cutted to a fully rooted pot. And the red breeze and the Cimarron breeze is a little sandier. Red breeze is a little more heavy on the clay, but they both have clay in them to kind of hold things together. But really, once the roots start to colonize that soil block, they hold themselves together with the roots pretty solid. Before I get to you, I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, so I work for the city of Aurora out at the Lake Conservation Center, and I started a restoration project this year, and I started doing some seed collecting, and I would like to do some propagating on site. So I was wondering if you do like any consultations or what kind of resources there are available for specific species and how I can successfully grow them and plant them in the prairie.
Sure. So I'm happy to share my email with anybody so you can reach out to me. Because the program is new, we don't have a lot going on yet. But there are a lot of little things with this that are really important that I've developed. So the seedling, it's really hard to tell what the seedling looks like on all of these plants. especially when we're growing in the breeze. There are weeds and weed material in that. So I'm actually collecting photos of what all of the seedlings look like of everything that I'm growing. Hopefully we can publish them in some way, shape, or form, because that was one of my biggest hurdles, was figuring out what does it look like when it's this big, because they look very different most of the time. So Maggie and I are going to work together to start to bring some of that together in a way that you guys would be able to use, because there's nothing out there about what they look like.
Most of the greenhouses that are currently operating aren't fully sustainable. I was curious if there's a book or to incorporate maybe some more.
Part of the problem, a few of our greenhouses are not historic, but a few of them are. And because they're historic, there are laws behind not changing those buildings. So the buildings that are historic, we won't ever be able to change. But moving forward, we would like to see, black barrels with sand or water for passive heating and things along those nature. But we are kind of stuck with our historic buildings. I saw you had a question.
I was interested in the pots as well. So the clay, you get the sandstone breeze, you get it real moist with the clay.
Yes, we start it moist, and it does get watered pretty regularly. So it gets watered with a light spray twice a day for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what it is. But we've had no issues with those soil blocks staying up and together. And I'm pretty surprised by that, actually.
And then you don't necessarily process it, no stratification, no nothing.
Some need it. So like with the beaked hazelnuts, we have them in the fridge right now. Especially some of the trees need the stratification a little bit more. But we actually did 3 side by side. So one of them, we did a winter stratification. One of them we actually cooked in a sous vide at 110 degrees for 12 hours. And then the last one was just no pre-treatment whatsoever. And the no pre-treatment has actually given us the best germination rates. But we're collecting pretty fresh seed, and that might be part of that.
And also I'll mention, like, with the grass seeds, like, they just need dry stratification and they're available to collect all winter long. And so we're not collecting grass. We like wait on that, so the dry strat happens in the field and we don't have to do it inside.
See with juniper, I'll collect the cones off of junipers like December. And there are some things the mountain mahogany has done a little bit better with this cold strat that we've just collected later. But otherwise, really the best germination. Plants don't read books. I say that all the time. There's 1,000 books about it, but plants don't read books. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a quick question just on the transport of your soil blocks.
Yeah.
You're getting from greenhouse to field.
Yeah.
Are you just keeping them a little wet? Taking
Yep.
them sucked down?
Yep, but otherwise, really no issue. And I was really surprised, especially with the red breeze. I was thinking that it was going to be really crumbly, but as soon as the roots populate that soil block, not an issue. And it's really pretty quick that it's happening. So.
Are you transplanting pretty much when they're ready, or trying to time the transplanting?
So part of it is manpower, honestly. And we're working to work with other organizations to get them transplanted quicker. But really, I'm trying to get a fully rooted pot or soil block before I take them out. So that would be when they're ready. Any of the material that I'll put in medians or in parks in that 1 gallon, I'm actually going to overwinter in cold frames. So I have an even larger plant to put out next year, because those larger plants that are a little showier speak more to the layman. So those will keep over winter, but otherwise it's a push to get as much out as we possibly can. You start with your herbaceous plants because they'll freeze and go dormant. Your woodies can go a little bit later into fall, and fall will always be your best time to establish your woodies.
And I want to say something about this too. So like my students were out there, what was it, April 21st, and we're like, let's go cut the poles, like let's get the stems for the propagation. That's the right time to do it. Well, Alex and his crew have just been doing it all summer just to try.
And
And
don't read books.
he can root out the cottonwoods without the leaves dropping, and remind that we are not fertilizing. We are just recycling the horticulture waste from the other department, so it's just amazing. Really, there's nothing secret happening. It's just
so good, you guys.
Yeah.
I really am happy to help anybody who's interested in doing this, because more needs to happen. Even the nurseries, you know, the plant material that is available and native is often the cultivar, so I don't even consider that native. And then it's really, really expensive. And we need these plants to be accessible to everybody, because why would you plant a native garden if every 5-gallon shrub nursery is almost $80? So I'm really trying to work with the nurseries as much as possible because this plant material needs to be accessible to everybody.
Some of the questions about the poles. So do you store them in water to root them, or do you just get them into the ground right away?
So when we go collect, anything riparian, we'll fill up 5-gallon buckets in the creek as we arrive. And then we cut, and that material stays in the 5-gallon buckets until we get it to the greenhouse. Once we get it to the greenhouse, depending on the species, it's a little different. I might let the willow and the cottonwood just sit in a bucket. But we have this weird contraption that we call the leaf, and I don't know what else to call it, but it's this metal leaf. And when the misters spray, the water holds the leaf down, and then as that evaporates, it pops back up, and that system knows to spray again. So we have had better success, a little bit of rooting hormone with a fresh cut straight into the breeze and then under the leaf. And 3 weeks is pretty standard, whether it's riparian or whether it's something that's a little bit more arid. Rooting is fast. But I'd almost say that the arid plants respond to that moisture faster than the riparian plants, because I think the riparian plants are just used to that moisture, but a 4-wing sawbrush never is. And so as soon as it's getting ample water, that's just like quick and easy for it to root.
And I will say, if you were trying this at home and not in a greenhouse, like you could make that relative humidity by like putting a like 2-liter bottle on top of the pot. And then you make like a little greenhouse to keep that humidity stable. Yeah,
That I hope to start to
Yeah,
put this ball court once we get it back out.
we have Kenner, the honors thesis student who's working right now, and actually we have a new volunteer. So this is where the academic piece comes in. I have a student in my botany class who's a high school student, and she's in my online botany class, and she's probably going to start monitoring it because she's really interested. And you saw the pictures, like a flat of seeds is like a spreadsheet. It's just bimodal data 101011, whether it germinated or not. You know, that's the monitoring. And then Alex can talk, or he knows the treatments, like which one's got which percentage of compost and freeze.
I'm like a little grandma who makes the perfect tortillas. I know just exactly the right real work to get those out on paper so that they make a little bit more sense. Go for it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Maggie's awesome. And it was a very fate-like happening. So I'm very glad.
And then we were so plagued because like everyone is seeing Alex. So like, it's Alex Smith is Failing Gardens Nursery. Alex, we don't even know his last name. Owns Western Native Seed. So we work almost exclusively with Western Native Seed, which is in Coaldale. Thompson? Yeah, I thought it was Thompson. I just wasn't sure. Tomlin. Wow. And then the propagator at Harlequin Gardens is also named Alex. And I forgot to mention that like Harlequin Gardens has facilitated our plant sale for years. And so that I am sorry I'm missing that. I didn't mention that. Like without Harlequin Gardens, we would not have been able to ever have a native plant sale. And yes, working with municipal partner is a novel concept, but working with nurseries is not.
You have resources for, you talk about trail restoration, closing social or rise trails. And so we've done some of that. And we put out, especially this past year, Sage and a number of other things. Some of it is just a barrier to stop people from growing through a certain area. Some, it's always easier with our grass mixes when we put that in. Just wondering if you have resources on there, because I think some of the stuff we're planting, we have a water program this year. We could increase the success of the plants that we put in.
So I don't do much of any of that. I'm just kind of in my own little greenhouse world, but the city has two huge trails open space park teams. So they would be the ones to talk to you about that. But one of their leaders is actually here. His name is Scott Abbott. If I see him around, I'll let him know that there's interest in that, because Scott is doing it in really good ways. And he also has a pretty decent homeless issue that he has to deal with. So they've got some pretty creative ways of how they're doing some of their closures. But I would definitely talk with Scott Abbott about that, because he's been doing it for a minute.
And I will mention that, like, the seed bank restoration, restore the seed bank. If you build it, they will come. It's not on your time scale, right? So, like, if we have a strong monsoon season, like, the time to do this is after July 4th, right? Get the seeds down so they germinate and establish before the fall, especially the grass. But if we have a weak monsoon season, the seeds are still there, right? So it might not look great every time you do it, but when the moisture is there, then you'll have the action. And I've mainly just found that it doesn't work to do it in the spring because there's too much competition from early cereal weeds. If you start watering to germinate the grass seeds, you're just gonna make all the weeds very heavy. So July 4th is the marker in my head, like start laying the seeds July 4th.
I think that, curious if whoever is doing your monitoring, what would be curious for me would be how plants are surviving with the compost added in the medians, with all the salts they're doing. I don't know if that's part of the equation, but.
Yeah, well, there's
I don't
a,
know that.
no, I mean, there's a lot of research that's coming out of CSU primarily showing that, like, if you start a plant in any media that's not like the native soils, like the plant never leaves that habitat. And so people are doing soil washing and all of this, but there's no transition when we use the red freeze, right? We put this soil in and the seed, there's no soil interface. So that's a positive, but we know that there's probably high in nitrogen, this compost we're making right now, because it's taking in the annuals and all of that traditional stuff, right? So adding the wood is what you think will drop the nitrogen. So more carbon in the compost.
Are you concerned with salt on the roads as well? Like,
Yeah,
Time.
when I'm seeing the median, right, that's like the most extreme places you can put plants.
sure.
And so,
So in the springs, especially in the historical medians, for whatever reason, they're way wider than what a traditional median would look like. So there are perennials planted throughout there. There's not a huge issue with the salts. Moving forward, I'm really curious to see what things like the 4-winged saltbrush will do, because we can have up to a 40-foot taproot on some of those plant specimens, which is super deep. And so often plants with a really deep root like that will be somewhat halophytic and be able to handle some of those salts, because the salts are just never going to go as deep. But as we start to make those transitions, our first meeting conversions will happen next year. We will monitor that kind of thing, because working at the zoo, the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo is on a hill like this, and they salt the crap out of it, and there is so much burn on a lot of plants. The white firs especially often had pretty bad burn from the salt. So we'll definitely monitor that kind of stuff. But I'm hoping the deep roots will really help make more halophytic plants.
And one species that is really salt tolerant is switchgrass. And I want switchgrass to be like the next parking lot grass. And it in particular, I have pictures of salt wicking up on the ground, and the switchgrass is just doing this perfect. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for listening.
Have lunch.
Yes. Halo-fitted plants are. Shit,